Hi, and welcome again to Ivy English. I'm Karen.
And I'm Chris Gorski.
Today is February 24th, getting close to the end of the month. We're on page 74, and today we're going to hear part one of a two-part article of some rules that you need to pay attention to.
Yeah, we're talking about the Presentation Skills Guide, or we're talking about how to give a PowerPoint presentation. Now, if this sounds kind of, no duh, there's actually kind of a skill to it, right? There
absolutely is. And if you look up death by PowerPoint, you're going to get a lot of information on this.
Yes, there was something, as I was kind of thinking about what I wanted to talk about today, there was a list that came up of like the most annoying things that happened during a PowerPoint presentation.
And we're going to hear about most of them today.
We're going to hear a lot about them. There's a lot of sins you could commit. I mean, I think everybody innately knows how to give a PowerPoint presentation, but there's a real difference between giving a presentation and giving a good presentation. And hopefully, I think between the two of us, we can kind of share some thoughts and opinions based on our article and see if you guys come to an agreement with us, or perhaps you have something of your own to share with us. And I'd like to hear those.
Yeah, on giving a PowerPoint presentation that people don't snooze through.
Yeah.
Snooze, S-N-O-O-Z-E, S-N-O-O-Z-E. That means to take a nap or fall asleep. Okay, here we go. First paragraph, Presentation Skills Guide. Do you have to give a presentation? Don't panic. It's easier than it sounds. And there are several techniques that can help you. One recommended starting point is the preparation of PowerPoint slides. Let's take a look at some helpful tips for creating a PowerPoint presentation.
People have fairly short attention spans. Because of this, it's easy to lose their interest, which is the kiss of death for any presentation. Therefore, it's best to keep your speech concise and to the point. This is especially true for the first bit of information they see, the title. Some professional speakers say that you should try to limit your title to 5 words or less whenever possible. Also, there are many other parts of your presentation where brevity is a good rule, which we'll look at next.
Public speaking experts have come up with some tips that use numbers to help you remember them. One of these is called the 5-5-5 rule. What this means is that you shouldn't have more than 5 words in each of your lines. There should only be 5 lines on each slide, and you shouldn't have more than 5 slides in a row with a lot of words on them. There is also the 10-20-30 rule of PowerPoint. The number 10 refers to the most slides you should show, while the 20 is the maximum number of minutes your presentation should be. Moreover, 30 is the minimum font size you should use in your slides.
The final tip concerns the use of visual aids and props, such as animations and other eye-catching images. The general rule is that they should support your presentation, but not distract the audience's attention. Thus, they should not be overused.
I'm going to mention a phrase that is often used in this context before we go back over the whole article. And that is bells and whistles.
That's a great phrase. Yeah.
It's a nice phrase. Bells and whistles, these are fancy things you can do to your PowerPoint presentation to jazz it up, like you use a fading in or a fading out or a little animation or, things jumping around, or maybe part of the text shows first, then another part, then another part. There's all kinds of stuff you can do to make your presentation fancy. I personally do not like bells and whistles. They're distracting for me.
I feel they, like many things, could be used tastefully. A great way to learn about what's super obnoxious in a PowerPoint presentation is to have your kids make one on, if you have children. Kids, next year I'm going to let you decide where we're going on vacation. You need to make a PowerPoint presentation, and you need to tell me why. Kids need to learn computer skills, and they're very excited to build these kind of things, something they care and want to talk about, and they will make the most obnoxious, colorful, dancy,
jumping around,
sugar high presentation you've ever seen in your life. As a teacher of younger children, I see these regularly, and in some ways, it's almost like watching a B movie. It's so bad, it's good.
That's right. The first thing I think is, I didn't know how to do that. How do you do that? And the second thing I think is, this is so distracting, and please don't do this.
Yes. Have you ever heard of Prezi?
No.
Prezi was this thing that was around, maybe around 15 years ago. presentation, but the S becomes a Z and then it's I. And it was this very heavy animation-based presentation
app.
Yeah. And it would make me nauseous watching them. Literally make me nauseous watching them because of the animations were so jerky. And people love them. And they're very garish, which means very bright, loud colors, and they were hard to watch.
Garish. Garish. Garish, that means they're sort of ghostly and they're not pleasing.
Yeah.
Kind of scary. All right, so yeah, bells is just ding dong, bells, and whistles is right? Or a whistle can also be an instrument. Those are bells and whistles. Those are just fancy things that don't add content. They just make it kind of fancier.
Make noise.
Yeah, noise and funny images and everything, and will make Chris dizzy. So skip, S-K-I-P, skip the bells and whistles. Let's go back to the beginning. Do you have to give a presentation? All right, somebody has said, okay, you need to give us a presentation on your budget proposal or on, like Chris said, the upcoming trip or on a book that everybody has to read. We're going to give a presentation first so they know something about the book, whatever it is. Okay, so a lot of people will just freeze up and go, I'm scared or whatever. So the next sentence says, don't panic. Don't worry, it's not that bad. And we go on, it's easier than it sounds, and there are several techniques that can help you. So it is not that hard. So open up your PowerPoint program, and we're going to show you what to do. One recommended starting point is the preparation of PowerPoint slides. I kind of jumped ahead a bit, so open up PowerPoint, and you can have all kinds of templates or templates, however you say it, and you can pick your colors and then start organizing your information. And finally, let's take a look at some helpful tips for creating a PowerPoint presentation. All right, so watch out for your stress here. Don't say PowerPoint presentation. It's PowerPoint. PowerPoint. It's just one word, so point is not stressed. PowerPoint presentation. Okay, I think the first paragraph is just a general introduction, and it's pretty easy.
All right, very quick note on this paragraph. Please don't ever say PPT to an audience filled with foreigners. We don't call it that at all. Now, I am used to saying PPT here in Taiwan, but please just call it a PowerPoint presentation. And another quick note is PowerPoint is just a single word with 2 capital P's. Is this grammatical? No, it's not, but it's kind of like iPhone with a little I and a capital P. You kind of got to know that. Otherwise, it's just one of those common mistakes that people trip on because of the way this company presents itself.
In fact, a lot of company names do that. They just got rid of the space and they kept the capitals. That's because they often use their company name for their web address. And if there's a space in a web address, it generates some funny characters and creates problems. So very often that space has been removed. Another one that you need to change your pronunciation of in English is APP.
Yeah, that's another good one. I agree.
We call it an app. We don't call it an APP. So it's fine for Chinese. That's the Chinese pronunciation. In English, say, oh, I just got this neat new app.
Yeah, and these are little changes that will quickly improve your English. It makes you come across much more native. If you're still using these kind of Taiwanese versions of saying it, they're not wrong. Like, you're in Taiwan, you're here speaking with other Chinese language speakers. But if you need to give presentations to audiences of foreigners, adopt those languages and adopt the way we say things. It's going to make your English come out more fluent.
That's right. We'll do a double take. That means we go,
Right.
What did you just say? Oh, you probably mean PowerPoint. Don't do that to your listener. It just confuses them.
Let's move on to paragraph 2 here. People have fairly short attention spans.
This is biological. That's not a criticism of people. Our attention span is about 25 minutes. That's the maximum. And that's why it's used for pomodoros, P-O-M-O-D-O-R-O, Pomodoro. And that comes from the tomato timer. It's a timer that looks like a tomato. You are asked to set it for 25 minutes, work without being distracted, and then take a break. That's a Pomodoro. It's a very effective way of working. But it's based on this biological fact about humans is our attention span is about 25 minutes at best, and you need rest.
While we're going through this, I want you to keep in mind the way TV is built. TV is very fast. TV changes images between every 3 and 8 seconds. You will very, very rarely see a shot longer than 15 seconds unless it's a conscious stylistic choice made by the director. I'm thinking something like Martin Scorsese, like in Goodfellas.
Yep.
It's a very rare thing to do. And if you could kind of build some of those TV rules into your presentation, it's going to help keep interest, because the more variety you can add and the less dry you are, the better you're going to hold that attention, as short as it may be. Let's continue. Because of this, it's easy to lose their interest, which is the kiss of death for any presentation.
And earlier you heard me mention death by PowerPoint. These are related. Whenever we think of PowerPoint, a lot of us will think of death.
Yes.
Because if you make it boring, it's going to put everybody to sleep like they're dead.
Therefore, it's best to keep your speech concise and to the point.
This is true of everything. It's not just PowerPoint presentations. When you're writing, it's really important because we now have too much stuff to read. People will complain that people aren't reading enough books anymore. Oh, but we're reading lots more than we did before because there's tons of stuff online to read. And with so much choice, we are getting pickier. And if we see something sort of interesting, we'll often skim it, pick out the main points, and move on.
The opposite of concise is long-winded, which is something I have a big problem with. I try to be concise. I often remind myself to be concise, but I am not concise.
Oh, you're excellent. Okay, so concise just means get to the point. Don't ramble. R-A-M-B-L-E. Ramble means to wander all over the place. And that is out of consideration for your audience.
Let's continue. This is especially true for the first bit of information they see, the title.
A title should be snappy because if you don't have an interesting title, nobody is going to bother listening to the rest.
Okay, here's my first opinion here. Your title should be the last thing you make. And every slide that you make should be focused on supporting that title. So you're going to make your first draft of your presentation. You will need to edit it. And then after you're finishing building this proper presentation, then you can finally form this title. You look back through your presentation a third time, and you need to make sure that everything you say is moving back to that title. Does it relate to this title or not? Because if you're not, then your presentation will come off as unfocused. Why is this title this? Why are we talking about that?
So I would revise it just a little bit. Start out with a long, boring title because you have to know what you're working towards. Because I think Chris gave you good advice. If you see the title of something, that's what the whole thing is about. And that will tell you right away whether you want to bother reading it or not. So the title really has to be exactly what you're writing about. At the beginning, you probably can't write a snappy title. So write a long, boring title. Make your presentation, prepare it, then go back and edit the title to make it snappy. S-N-A-P-P-Y. S-N-A-P-P-Y. Snappy here just means clever.
Let's continue. Some professional speakers say that you should try to limit your title to 5 words or less whenever possible.
That's right. The shorter it is, the more memorable it is. It's easy to remember.
You know where I think a good exception to this is like Western book titles. I feel like every book written in the West for the past 20 years has been one big word, short phrase A, B, and C, and what, how, why we do something. Right? It's
Goodness.
Like Analytical English, the best, smartest, and most wonderful magazine that you could ever buy, and why it matters to you. Right. I feel like this has become a format, and it's inescapable. It's almost starting to grate on me. So I think having a little understanding of how your title impacts people, it may help them. I know it sells books. I just don't like it.
Yeah, maybe for books, but I know because I have to write a monthly article. So that's the method I use because I know what I want to write about. So the first title is really boring and I know my editor would definitely change it. But after I've finished the article, my brain has been working on it and it says, how about this?
Right.
That's kind of clever.
Right.
And then I fix the title and then the editor leaves it.
Wow, wonderful.
Yeah. Okay.
Let's continue here. Also, there are many other parts of your presentation where brevity is a good rule, which we'll look at next.
That is especially true now because, like I said, we are just overwhelmed with stuff to read. It has to be short and to the point, or nobody's going to bother with it. And I remember my father taught me a little saying, in brevity is wit.
Right.
In brevity is wit. Brevity is the noun for brief, which means short, and is wit. Wit is cleverness. So if you want something to be really clever, try to make it short.
Absolutely. When I jump on the internet and I'm just being silly and I want to make a funny comment on a news story, I always try to keep it at most one sentence.
Yeah.
If it's longer than that, it's probably not going to be funny.
Or it's not going to be read. That's right. Next paragraph. Public speaking experts have come up with some tips that use numbers to help you remember them. So we're going to get a bunch of numbers in series, in a series of 3. We've got 555 and we've got 10, 20, 30. Just be careful that you don't end up remembering the numbers but forgetting what they're standing for. What are we talking? Because I had to look them up when the question kind of came up. We're going to have part 2 of the article tomorrow, and there will be some questions. By that point, you may have forgotten. So to avoid that, try to remember them when you hear them now. So we're going to give you some tips, and using numbers makes things easier to remember, but you still have to try to memorize it or you'll forget it. And one of these is called the 555 rule. Oh, that's easy to remember, but it makes me think of cigarettes.
It made me think of pizza. That's funny that our minds went somewhere different. Like, I remember Herman Cain was trying to be president, and he came up with this healthcare proposal. And it sounded because he had come from Domino's Pizza.
Yeah.
And it sounded exactly like you're buying cheesy bread and getting a pepperoni pizza.
Was it 555 or something like it?
It was something extremely similar about how much you pay towards your health care in the United States. And it was the 555 policy. And I was like, that sounds really delicious, but I don't know if that's how health care works.
But you're thinking of pizza. Well, for me, I have a family member whose favorite cigarette brand is 555. And he would ask people to pick it up at the duty-free shop every time they traveled. Okay, let's move on. What this means is that you shouldn't have more than 5 words in each of your lines. There should only be 5 lines on each slide. And you shouldn't have more than 5 slides in a row with a lot of words on them. So they're trying to reduce the number of words. So first of all, make sure that each line on your slide has no more than 5 words. Otherwise, it gets too long and people aren't going to read it or they won't have time to read it. Second of all, no more than 5 lines, but often 5 lines per slide is too much. It can be even less than that, maybe 3. And finally, if you have 5 slides in a row that have a lot of words on them, you better vary it and put in a nice graphic. That will introduce some variety and then people will be less likely to fall asleep.
If you take my advice, this is probably the best information we're going to have today personally. For me, as a person that gives public speeches pretty regularly, and you may too, I am a person that believes that rules are meant to be broken, but we need to master the rules first before we can learn where the wiggle room is, before we can learn to kind of bend the rules to be creative and interesting within those general things that we accept as standard and good. To me, this is well worth a highlight, that the cardinal sin, the biggest sin, the most wrong thing you can do when giving a presentation is just reading the sentences to the people. Oh. It's insulting your audience because you assume they can't read it. And really what it tells me is you don't really have anything interesting to say. The presentation is not for you. It is for your audience. And the words up there, at most, you look up and it reminds you what your next line is to be, and you have a lot more interesting, valuable information. It is not for you to read. It is for your audience, and you start speaking.
A similar situation is at academic conferences when an old scholar gets up, hands out his paper to everybody, and then reads it to everybody. That actually happened, and we just kind of thought, well, he's old. We better indulge him a little bit. Okay, so there is also the 10, 20, 30 rule of PowerPoint. So here we have now 3 more numbers. They're all easy to remember. They're both easy to remember, 555, 10, 20, 30. The number 10 refers to the most slides you should show. Now, I would often break this rule. I had one with, probably 80 slides.
But if it's good content. And this is, I think, a good starter rule, right?
It was an academic conference. I had a reason for it, but as it's a good starter rule, because if you have too many slides, people are stuck reading. You should connect with your audience with your personality. So like Chris says, you're reminded of what to say by the slide, and then you just take off on that and ad lib. A-D, second word L-I-B, ad lib. That means you just speak to them like you're in a regular conversation. So what is the 10, 20, 30 rule of PowerPoint? The number 10 refers to the most slides you should show. So no more than 10. And then while 20 is the maximum number of minutes your presentation should be, and that is a really good rule. Because like we said, our attention just fades around 20 minutes. 25 is okay. After that, no. People are just going to tune out. They're getting tired. And moreover, 30 is the minimum font size you should use in your slides. A 30-point font is pretty big. Use a large font. For one thing, a lot of people do not have good eyesight. It's hard to see things, especially so far away, in tiny print. So make the font big and easily visible.
It will also limit how much that you can put on a single slide, which is maybe, like me, you have a problem with brevity or being concise. So a large font size will limit how much you could put on the page. And I'm a person that always tries to include at least one visual aid per slide, large or small. And
that
this
takes
will
up space
reduce
too.
it. That's right. And so it forces you to be brief. It forces you to be concise.
And in the end, you think, wow, I had to take all this out. And you think, oh, it's so much better now.
Right. Let's continue to our final paragraph today. The final tip concerns the use of visual aids and props, such as animations and other eye-catching images.
All right, here's your first little pop quiz, or maybe the only one. What was that little phrase that we told you is another word for what they're describing here?
Bells and whistles.
Yeah, so take it easy on the bells and whistles.
By the way, that is a very good phrase. That's the second time you've brought it up, and I say, yeah, that fits right in here.
That's right. So you can use them, but just don't overdo it because that is really distracting, and you are moving the focus of your content to the bells and whistles.
This makes me think of when you go to... Do you remember GeoCities, this website?
Yes.
GeoCities was a page made by Yahoo, which you may remember or may still actively use. And GeoCities, you were allowed to make your own web page. And we were not professional web developers. We did not have a lot of tools. And generally, most people's pages was just like visual vomit. It was just... an absolute...
That's not very kind.
It was a wall of images and text and colors and flashy, blinky things.
Things that didn't match.
It didn't match. And it was fun for what it was. But looking at it with any kind of an artistic eye, it was just a bomb of information. And you could go look at them today. And they're all funny looking in their old, dated way. And it's too much eye-catching stuff. Eye-catching should be used... Sparingly.
Exactly the word. They were very amateur, but, some of them had good content in spite of the really poor presentation. But I think GeoCities shut down.
It
so
did.
That stuff is gone now forever.
Well, some people, because they just care about this kind of stuff, it was archived. And GeoCities is gone, but the archive still exists where you can dig into some certain amount of pages. And there's a certain charm to it. I'll give it that. There's a certain charm.
Vintage.
Yes. Yeah, it's vintage cool.
Vintage. Vintage. It refers to wines of a certain year quite a long time ago.
Let's continue. The general rule is that they should support your presentation, but not distract the audience's attention. Thus, they should not be overused.
And that is extremely important. We're kind of leaving you hanging here because we have part 2 tomorrow. But please remember this rule. As soon as the focus turns on, wow, isn't that flashy? Wow, how did you do that? That means that your content is not coming across. Your bells and whistles are coming across.
So if you really want to develop your presentation skills, there's this fun game that you can play. It's pretty good after you've had a few drinks. It's called PowerPoint Karaoke. And the idea is that you get a completely unknown topic handed to you.
Yeah.
And you need to sell it competently.
Oh.
And the value in this is that you don't know what you're talking about, but should you say something confidently enough, there's a whole lot of people that will swallow it hook, line, and sinker, meaning completely believe you. This is a fishing term. And it gives you lots of practice with ad-libbing.
You have led us into another topic we can't cover now, but that is actually how the media works. And that is why we are so divided now,
Right.
Because we just believe everything that we see in the media, hook, line, and sinker. My group, my social group says this, it must be right, and we will stand on it to the death.
Right.
Okay, that's leaving you kind of hanging. So if you want to hear the rest of the story and learn some more important rules to help your PowerPoint presentations be less boring, tune in tomorrow. We will see you then. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.